They say the moments that change your life don't come with a warning. No loud signs, no drama, just a quiet shift. Saw small, you almost miss it. Mine happened on a Thursday. Nothing special. Just me and my stepson, and what I saw that day. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, not for a single day. It wasn't supposed to go that far. It wasn't supposed to feel like that. But it did, and the part that still breaks me, I didn't see it coming. Not even a hint. Sometimes when your heart's been empty for too long, when you've been unseen, unheard, untouched, you start to crave connection wherever you can find it, even in the places you never expected. And that's what this story is. It's not neat. It's not easy, but it's real, because the line between right and wrong, it's not always clear. Not when you're lonely, not when you're hurting, not when someone finally looks at you like you matter. What happened that day changed everything for me, for him, for this family, and maybe it'll make you think about the things you keep buried too. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales. Unfold this story will stay with you. I've been married for 7 years, and in those 7 years, I've learned how to live inside silence, not peaceful silence. The kind where love is quiet but still present. No, this was the kind of silence that eats at you little by little, where two people share a roof, but not a life. My husband was always working, always, busy, phone in his hand. Eyes on a screen, mind somewhere I couldn't reach. If he wasn't at the office, he was asleep. We didn't fight. We didn't scream. We just coexisted like two people waiting for something to shift but too tired to move. He didn't ask questions anymore. Didn't notice when I stayed up late. Didn't notice when I stopped asking how his day was. I was just the woman who made dinner, who cleaned the kitchen, who folded his laundry and placed it neatly on the bed, and sometimes if I was lucky, I'd get a tired "thank you." But deep down I was starving, not for touch, not even for sex, for presence, for someone to look at me and actually see me, for someone to ask how I was really, and wait for the answer. The kind of connection you don't even realize you're missing until it's completely gone. And then there was himmy, husband's son. 18, quiet, respectful, kind. In that quiet way some people are. He didn't talk much, never crossed boundaries, but there was always something unspoken between us. Not inappropriate. Not then just a stillness, like we both noticed things the others didn't like. We both knew how it felt. Toby, invisible in a house full of walls. He'd always been polite, a little, withdrawn, always kept to himself, but over time, I started noticing the little things, like how he always put his dishes in the sink without being asked, or how he never let me carry heavy groceries alone, how he'd pause when I spoke, actually listen, and I didn't realize how much that mattered. How rare that had become. The house we lived in was nice, neat, suburban, the kind of place people drive by and think, what a lovely family must live there. But inside it was hollow rooms filled with routines, conversations made of small talk, and half-hearted good nights. There were nights I'd sit by the window long after the lights were off, pretending I liked the quiet. But the truth, I was disappearing, piece by piece, and no one noticed, no one except him. I remember the first time it hit me. I had cut my hair, nothing drastic, just something new. I came downstairs wearing my usual morning smile, half fake, half habit. My husband didn't look up, didn't say a word. But as I passed the living room, my stepson glanced up from the couch, and without skipping a beat, he said, "You cut your hair, it looks nice, that's all, just that." But it felt like someone had reached out and touched a part of me I'd forgotten was still there. It wasn't the compliment. It was the awareness, the presence. He saw me. And that moment, saw small, so innocent, stayed with me. It settled in a quiet place inside my chest and didn't leave. I didn't think much of it. Then I didn't let my mind wander. But something had shifted. The air between us felt different, not dangerous, just awake, and in a house where everyone felt half asleep. That was enough to make me feel alive again. It was a Sunday late afternoon, the kind of day that stretches on forever. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My husband had gone out some work thing again. He didn't say much before leaving, just tossed his keys on the counter and mumbled something about not waiting. Up, the dishes were done. Laundry folded, dinner wasn't for another few hours, and for some reason I walked past his room, me stepson's door. It was open. Not wide, just slightly ajar, enough for me to hear something muffled, sound, music. Maybe a voice. I wasn't sure. I paused. I don't even know why. Maybe it was instinct, Or maybe it was because I'd started noticing him the way I used to notice my own reflection back when I still checked. For it, I leaned a little closer and then I saw him. He was sitting on the floor back against the side of his bed, headphones on, eyes red, not swollen, not loud crying, just quiet, still tears sliding down his cheeks like they didn't ask for permission. His shoulders were tight, his hands clenched like he was holding himself together by a thread. He looked like someone who hadn't been held in a very long time, someone who had learned to grieve silently, someone who didn't expect anyone to notice. I knocked gently, he didn't hear. I pushed the door just enough for it to creak open. And that's when he looked up. There was no embarrassment on his face. No anger, just surprise. I walked in slowly, not wanting to startle him, not wanting to break whatever fragile thing was hanging in the air. I sat beside him. Not too close, just close enough he took off his headphones. No words at first, and then he asked, "You okay?" He nodded, lied, "I'm fine." But his voice cracked halfway through, and something in me cracked. With it, I didn't press, didn't ask what happened, didn't try to fix it. I just sat there for a long time. Then after a few minutes, he said, "I was watching a video from when I was little." His voice was soft, like he was afraid if he spoke too loud, he'd fall apart. He added, "My mom used to take videos of everything, birthdays, even just breakfast. It's weird he haven't seen her in years, but hearing her voice still." He trailed off and I didn't know what to say because I didn't know that side of his life. I only stepped in after the damage, after the loss, after he'd already built walls to survive all. So I did the only thing I could. I placed my hand on his. It was a light touch, barely there, but he didn't pull away. In fact, he looked at me, really looked, and for a second, just 1 second, I saw it, the overlap, that invisible thread between us. His grief, my loneliness. Both of us carrying things no one ever asked about. It felt like I was comforting the child no one else saw, not even his father. And in that moment, something shifted, not loudly, not clearly, but enough to make me pause before it stood up, enough to make me notice how our hands stayed connected just a little longer than they needed to. Enough to make the air feel heavier when I finally pulled mine away. I told him to come down for dinner when he was ready. He nodded, again this time softer. I left the room. But something in me didn't leave. Something stayed behind, and as I walked back down the hallway, I felt it, that quiet ache, like I had just touched something sacred and I wasn't sure if I was allowed to. It wasn't about him. It really wasn't. It was about me, about how empty I'd been feeling for years, about how I could walk through my own home and feel like a shadow, about how just once someone looked at me like I existed, not because I'd cooked a meal, not because I'd ironed a shirt, not because I was supposed to, but just because I was me, and that someone wasn't my husband, it was his son. And that's the part that's hardest to admit because it makes me feel like a monster. But I can't lie to myself. Not anymore. That night, sitting beside him on the floor, watching him silently grieve a life he'd lost, it touched something in me. Something soft, something tender. Something starved at old myself. I was just being kind, just doing what any decent person would do. He was hurting. I was there. That's all. But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt intimate, more intimate than anything I'd shared with my husband in a long time. And that scared me. Not because I wanted it to happen, but because it felt good, and it had been a long time since. Something had felt good without guilt attached to it. Still, the guilt came. It always does, doesn't it? I replayed the moment again and again. The way his eyes softened when I touched his hand, the way mine lingered before I pulled away. Did he feel it too? Was there a shift in him? Or was it just me projecting my achy onto someone else? Did he look at me differently the next morning? Or was I just looking too hard? I started watching myself, noticing the tiny ways I was changing. I'd put on lipstick in the mornings. Now, something subtle, nothing too obvious. I started wearing earrings again, the small hoops I used to love, but stopped bothering with at breakfast. I'd wait just a little longer before I left the room just to see if he'd say something. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't, but I hoped he would, and that's when I knew something was shifting in May. I didn't want him not in the way people think, but I needed something, some kind of validation, some kind of connection, and he was offering it quietly without even realizing. I'd catch myself thinking about him during the day, wondering what he was listening to in his room, if he'd had lunch, if he was okay, it wasn't maternal. Not exactly, and it wasn't romantic either, but it lived in that strange, undefined space between care and curiosity, and that space that's where danger lives. I kept telling myself it was harmless. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but my heart knew better. My body would stiffen when I heard his footsteps. My breath would catch if he looked at me too. Long, my thoughts were turning into something I didn't recognize, something that scared me, but also something that made me feel alive. And isn't that the cruelest part of all this? That the thing that feels like waking up is also the thing that could ruin everything is started. Pulling back, cooking, but not sitting, speaking, but not lingering, smiling, but not looking for too long. But even then I felt the tension between us. In the air something had been touched, and now it was awake. I didn't tell anyone. Of course I didn't. Who? Would I even tell? Who could I possibly say this to without being judged, without being called names? I wasn't ready to wear. But inside, I was spiraling, trying to be good, trying to be strong, trying not to need, but I was already slipping just a little, looking for excuses to walk past his door, listening too closely when he spoke, feeling my heart race over things that shouldn't have meant anything at all. I was walking into a storm, and I didn't even realize I was holding the match. Told myself I was in control, that I could manage the feelings, tuck them away, stay in the safe zone. I was older, wiser, married, but the heart doesn't work. Like that, it doesn't care about logic, ordinals, or vows whispered 7 years ago. Under a sky I barely remember. All it knows is how it feels when someone sees you, really sees you, and that's what started happening. A few more moments. Nothing grand, just the small things that pile up quietly when no one's looking. One afternoon we were both reaching for the same mug. He laughed. I did too. Our fingers touched. It was nothing, and it was everything, a spark, quick, unspoken, but it lingered. Then there was the time Wes stood outside as the sun was setting and was watering the plants. He came out to grab something, but we ended up talking about music, about how quiet the neighborhood was, about nothing really, until he said, "You ever feel like you're living in someone else's house?" And I just looked at him because, yes, God, yes, that's exactly how I felt. But I didn't say it. I just nodded, and he nodded too, like that was enough. Then there was the night. We were both in the kitchen. It was late. My husband was upstairs asleep. I couldn't sleep. Neither could he. We shared a cup of tea. The light above the stove was the only thing on. He opened up. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way boys do when they've had to grow up too fast. He said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm just in the way, like I don't really belong here." And I asked him what he meant, and he said, "My dad, he's never really looked at me. Not since I was a kid. I think he wanted a different version of me. One who didn't talk back. One who didn't cry so much. He didn't cry, yes." He said it, but his voice shook, and something in me broke. I reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder, just comfort, just care. But it felt like lightning, warm and sharp at the same time. He didn't move, just stood there, eyes on the floor. And then he leaned in, not fully, just enough that I could feel his weight, feel the way he was holding it all in. I wrapped my arms around him. He didn't pull away, and I didn't let go. Not for a long time. It wasn't lust, not even desire. It was something more dangerous. Tenderness and recognition, and emotional need tangled together in the dark. We didn't cross a line, but we were dancing on it, and every day after that, the dance continued at dinner. We'd share a joke that only the two of us got. While my husband scrolled through his phone, I'd feel his eyes on me, sometimes not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel known, and I'd find myself doing little things, making his favorite meals, asking how his classes were going, waiting a little longer after dinner to see if he'd stay and talk, and he did every time. The air between us got heavier, not tense, just full. Every glance held more meaning. Every silence became louder sometimes. I'd walk past his door and stop for a second just to hear if he was inside. Sometimes I think he did the same whenever touched again, like that night. But our words became softer, our laughs easier, and the space between us smaller. I told myself it was okay, that I was just being kind, that he needed someone, and I was filling the gap his father had left behind. But if I was honest, I needed him too, more than I ever wanted to admit. Then one night I woke up, the clock said 2:47 a.m. The house was quiet. I don't know what made me get out of bed, but I did. I walked down the stairs and I saw him in the living room, alone, sitting on the couch, knees pulled to his chest, crying again. No headphones this time, no distractions, just him and whatever had finally broken inside him that night. Everything changed. I stood at the edge of the living room. The lights were off. Only the moonlight spilling in through the blinds he didn't hear me at first. His shoulders were shaking, head bowed, and I just stood there watching, unsure if I should go to him, unsure if I should walk away. But then he looked up, and the way he looked at me, it stopped everything. He didn't say a word. But his eyes, they were pleading, not with desperation, with honesty, like he was trying to tell me something without words, like he needed me, not as a mother, as something else. And maybe that's what scared me most, that I understood. I walked over slowly. He didn't move, didn't wipe. His tears didn't pretend to be okay. He just watched. Me, silent, exposed, and I sat down beside him, not too close at first, but it didn't stay that way. I asked, "What's going on?" His voice was like it hurt to speak. He said, "I feel like I don't matter to anyone in this house." Then he added, barely above a whisper, "Except you." I couldn't speak, because part of me wanted to say, "You mattered to me more than I'm supposed to let you." But I didn't. Instead, I reached out. I held his hand. I wiped his tears, and then I don't know what came over me. We sat there in silence, his hand in Minna, my shoulder brushing his too close, too long, our hearts beating in rhythms that shouldn't sink, and in that space, something happened. Not an action, a shift, like the ground beneath us gave way. I wanted to pull away. But I didn't. He didn't either. There were no words, just breath and tension, and that terrible, beautiful feeling of being needed. He leaned his head on my shoulder, and I let him. We didn't kiss. We didn't say anything reckless, but we didn't have to, because everything was already said in the way we sat, in the way we breathed, in the way I didn't move. We stayed like that until the sky began to lighten, and in that space between night and morning, between guilt and longing, between right and what felt right, I knew I had already crossed over, not with my body, but with my heart, with my mind, and maybe that's worse. Just before sunrise, I stood up. I didn't say anything. I didn't look at him. I just walked away. But something inside me had already crossed over, and there was no walking back the next morning. I couldn't look at him. Not even for a second. I made coffee like I always did. Scrambled eggs, toast routine. But I couldn't meet his eyes. I couldn't even trust myself to speak. He came into the kitchen while I was pouring the coffee, and I felt it. The shift, the weight of everything we hadn't said sitting between us. He didn't say good morning, didn't ask what was for breakfast. He just stood there still. And when finally glanced at him, he looked away, quieter, not softer. Just distant, colder, like the night before had never happened, or maybe like it had and he didn't know what to do with it. Neither did I. Every move I made that morning felt wrong. Too loud, too careful, too aware. I was terrified my husband would notice. Something, some energy, some strange silence between us. But he didn't not. At first, he came down around 9, mumbled a tired greeting, sat at the table, and for a moment I let myself believe it would pass, that what happened, what almost happened, would fade into the blur of forgotten mistakes. But then he asked out of nowhere. He looked up from his plate and said, "Is something going on between you two?" My heart stopped, literally. Stopped. I forgot how to breathe. I froze. Because for the first time in years, he was watching me, actually watching. Noticing, and the panic hit fast. Did he hear something? Did he see us? Was there something in our eyes that gave it away? Some tiny detail I missed in my guilt-ridden haze? I tried to speak, to say no, to laugh it off, to shake my head, but my voice caught and he noticed. Of course, he noticed. I finally managed, "No, of course not." But it didn't sound right even to me. He didn't push, just stared at me for a moment longer than usual, and then he went back to eating. But the damage had already been done. A wall had gone up between all three of us, invisible but thick. My stepson barely looked at me the rest of the day. He stayed in his room, didn't come down for lunch, and I didn't go up because I didn't know who I was anymore. Not to him, not to myself. Every sound in the house felt louder. Every silence felt heavier. We went from something unspoken to something unspeakable. And the worst part, there was no blame to assign, no name to call. It just the aftertaste of something that almost happened, or maybe did, depending on who's telling the story. I kept walking through that house like a stranger, wiping down counters that didn't need it, rearranging things that hadn't moved, trying to distract myself from the truth that something had broken. Not loudly, not violently, but deeply. And none of us knew how to fix it. Looking back now, I still don't know what to call it. Was I a terrible person or just a lonely one? Sometimes I think those two things aren't so different. I've replayed that night 100 times in my mind, not just the way it happened, but the way It felt how something so still, so quiet, could echo so loud in the days that followed, and I keep wondering, what did it mean to him? Was it just grief was here aching for comfort? The only way he knew. How did he see me as a mother figure, as someone safe, or did he feel it too, that strange tension, that unspoken understanding, that quiet exchange of everything we couldn't say out loud? Thought I was healing him that night, on the couch when I wiped his tears. I told myself I was doing something good, something kind, but maybe I was just feeding my own hunger. I needed to feel wanted, needed to feel seen, needed to feel important, and in his eyes I was, but need isn't the same as love, and comfort isn't the same as clarity. And now I live with that, with the knowing I didn't destroy a family, but I didn't protect it either. I didn't touch him in the way people assume, but hearts have boundaries too, and I crossed them. Not with intention, but with emotion. And those are the lines that leave the deepest cuts whenever spoke of it again. Not once he kept his distance. I respected it, my husband, never brought it up again either. But things between us never went back to normal. We exist now in this strange, cold version of what we used to be, still married, still functioning, but something fundamental is gone. And I carry that quietly. This is the first time I've ever said it out loud. Not to confess, not to beg for forgiveness, maybe just to finally let it breathe. Because silence has weight, and I've been holding mine for far too long. Maybe I'm sharing this not to be judged, but to be understood. To say, here's what happened, and here's what it did to me. I didn't mean to blur the lines. I didn't mean to feel what I felt. But I did, and I still do not love, not guilt, even. But something deeper, a knowing, a scar, the kind you don't show, but never stop feeling. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where love, grief, and loneliness collided, where you weren't looking for anything, but somehow ended up standing too close to something you never saw coming? I need to know, what would you have done if it were you in that room, if it were your heart feelings seen for the first time in years? Would you have walked away sooner? Would you have said something, or would you have done what I did and stayed quiet? Tell me below, because I think we carry these stories alone for too long. And maybe if we started speaking them, we'd hurt a little less. Do you think emotional betrayal is worse than physical? Or are they the same? I don't even know where I land on that anymore, but I want to hear your truth. And if stories like this speak to something inside you, something soft, something scarred, then hit the like button and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. We share the stories not everyone dares to tell, the kind people live through, but don't always have the words, for some lines don't have to be crossed to leave scars. Sometimes it's not about what happened, but about what almost did. Some moments never go all the way, but they change everything anyway. So be careful. Be careful where you go, looking for warmth, for comfort, for connection, because sometimes the cost isn't what you do, it's what you feel. And once you felt it, really felt it, you don't walk.